Hi, I'm Karen Kenny, coordinator of the San Fernando Valley Patriots. Thank you all for being here today. Today we have an opportunity to learn about education in the state of California from someone who's been in the classroom, who's worked with parents, and knows the unions. Today, as part of our Patriots Civics 13 class, is Larry Sand, an experienced veteran educator who's going to teach us about the unions, and he represents the California Teachers Empowerment Network. Thank you, Larry, and welcome.
Hi, I'm Larry Sand, and it's a pleasure to be here, and I really want to thank Karen Kenny for having me speak here. And I'd like to tell you how I originally got involved in education reform. It was back in 2005. There was a prop called Prop 75. Prop 75, if it passed, would have made the political portion of teachers' dues voluntary. In other words, teachers would have to say whether or not they wanted to pay into the political part of the dues. The way things were, and unfortunately the way things still are, the default position for a teacher is in, and they have to go through certain hoops to get out. The proposition was very popular with the people and with teachers during the spring and into the summer. The California Teachers Association at that point went into overdrive, began lying. Many TV ads scared teachers. The proposition went down. Left a very bad taste in my mouth, and I realized the reason that the prop lost was too many people are getting their information from the teachers' unions and even from school districts, which did not tell the truth about this prop. So I started an organization, the goal of which is to try to get information to teachers. And about 2 years ago, the California Teachers Empowerment Network expanded the mission to include the general public, because we realize that the general public gets their information from the mainstream media. Need I say more? Here are some interesting education numbers for you. In 2013, 2014, we will spend $57 billion, with a B, dollars on public school education in California, which is about 58% of general fund expenditures. The Los Angeles Unified School District purports to spend about $10,000 to $12,000 a student. In fact, they really spend about twice that much. Why the disparity? Because they do not include capital costs in their per student numbers. Now, the last time I checked, we didn't educate students on a beach or on a field or on a mountaintop or in a meadow. We educated them in buildings. Therefore, the cost of those buildings must be included in the per student dollar amount, but they're not. LAUSD is not the only school district that fudges this data. Most school districts do, but in any event, it's very, very untruthful, and it's not giving the truth to the taxpayers who are paying for all this. Nationally, we are spending today 3 times what we did in 1970. That's constant dollars, correcting for inflation. What have we gotten for all this spending? Not very much. Our NAEP scores are flat and even down a little bit in certain areas. And here in California, we spend twice what we did 40 years ago. What have we got for our money? We're battling Mississippi for the bottom of the barrel in the United States. What are our dropout numbers? I don't really know, because they're not truthfully reported. For example, what the dropout numbers don't include are kids who drop out after middle school. Now, technically, we can't call these kids high school dropouts because they never dropped in. So if they never dropped into high school, they certainly can't drop out. But my way of thinking, a dropout is anybody who doesn't finish grade 12. And a middle school dropout certainly qualifies as that. Yet they are not counted in the official statistics. Another group that's not counted in the official statistics are the tough kids who drop out of a district school, go into the county school. County school's a tough place. It's like last chance for these kids. But if a kid leaves a district school, goes into a county school, gets dropped, leaves there, they are not counted as district dropouts. So when people ask me, what is the true dropout number? I don't know. Maybe it's 30%. The official numbers are maybe 20, 22, 23%. I think it's closer to 30, but it's hard to say because nobody's reporting the real numbers. What about the students who do graduate? The UC system, once one of the finest in the country, accepts only the best students in California, has a 30% remediation rate. 30% of the students who go into UC LA, UC Berkeley, UC Davis need remediation. That number doubles to 60% when we're talking about the Cal State schools, Cal State Dominguez Hills, Cal State Northridge. And it goes to a ridiculous 90% for the city and county colleges. 90% of the students going to those schools need remediation. This is a disgrace. It's a disgrace for the students who are not getting properly educated. It's a disgrace for the taxpayer who is paying for this. Taxpayers pay for K through 12, and then they're paying again for the job that K through 12 isn't doing, paying for the remediation on the college level. Teacher unions and power. The California Teachers Association, the biggest state union affiliate, takes in about $185 million a year in, I might add, forced dues. If you're a public school teacher in California, you must pay up if you're going to teach. What does the union do with these dues? Well, they do a lot of things, but the thing they spend the most on seems to be politics. Between 2000 and June of this year, 2013, they spent $290 million on candidates and causes, by far the biggest spender in the state. People wonder why Sacramento's a one-party town, why California's a one-party state. This is the reason. The single most important reason why we are a one-party state is the California Teachers Association. California Teachers Association, I've been told by those who know, considers themselves the fourth branch of government. They consider the state assembly their house. In 2011, they spent over $6.5 million on lobbying alone. And something many people don't know is how union dues are collected. The union does not collect their own dues. Teachers' dues in California are removed from a teacher's paycheck. They're deducted just the way federal tax, state tax are. And the union dues are then taken by the school district and turned over to the union at no cost to the union. It doesn't cost the union a penny to have the dues collected and paid for by the taxpayer. So in that sense, the taxpayer is actually being the bagman for the union. Union presidents like to think of themselves as men of the people, part of the 99%. But are they? Dean Vogel, president of CTA, takes in about $300,000 a year in total compensation. That's not too shabby. Doesn't do as well as the national people. National union leaders take in over $500,000. Clearly, these are one-percenters. And talking about one-percenters, perhaps the most hypocritical thing that the teachers' unions do is this. Many of you are familiar with the Occupy Wall Street crowd. Just ragtag bunch of mostly young people, some socialists, communists, anarchists, hippies, disenchanted for whatever reason people. The California Teachers Association has sponsored events with Occupy Wall Street. The hypocrisy is here. Occupy Wall Street and the teachers' unions, I might add, one of their main mantras is corporations need to pay their fair share. Okay, I think everybody should pay their fair share. The problem is nobody can figure out what fair share really means. But what they don't tell you is that CTA, as a private corporation and a union, does not have to pay 1 penny in tax. Yet they have the nerve to scream about Big Pharma and Big Oil not paying their fair share when CTA not only doesn't pay a fair share, they pay no share at all. The height of hypocrisy. By the way, no union in this country pays a penny in taxes. They are exempt under the 501c5 provision of the IRS code. Let's talk about teacher unions and reform. And this is really where they do so much damage. Teachers unions, what are they for? They're for tenure. Now, tenure may have started as a fair act of due process, but it has obviously become undue process because it is impossible to get rid of a bad teacher. In California, to be very blunt, 2 years on the job, you don't screw up regally, you have a job for life. And in so doing, because you basically have a job for life, good teachers get swept in, fine, but so do bad teachers. And this is the criminal part of tenure. Former CEO of GE, Jack Welch, famously had a 20-70-10 idea. He said in any industry, 20% of the workers are excellent. 70% are adequate, good enough, but 10% must go. Sounds reasonable to me. In 2011, do we know how many teachers lost their job in California? 10%? Hardly. 2%? Not even close. 2/10, 2/100, no, 2/1000 of 1%. 0.002% of teachers lost their job. It's almost no one. In a similar vein, Eric Hanushek, economist at Stanford University, said that if we could get rid of 5 to 7% of our bottom performing teachers, we could have a world-class system like Finland. But let's look at the hard numbers here. Hanushek's talking about 5 to 7. Let's talk about 6%. We have 300,000 teachers, give or take a few, in California. 6% of 300,000 is 18,000. That means we have 18,000 teachers who should not be in a classroom. And if each one of those 18,000 teachers has 25 kids in a class, we're talking about 450,000 students getting a rotten education every year. And this is a crime. And if some poor kid has 2 stinkers in a row, the kid will be turned off to education forever. They'll be 2 years behind and will not even want to go to school, will be educationally speaking damaged. It costs tons of money to get rid of a teacher who doesn't belong in the classroom. My last principal was very diligent. She wouldn't even try. It just cost way too much of her money and time to get rid of a bad teacher. LA Weekly did a study a few years ago about LAUSD, try to get rid of 7 bad teachers. Cost them $3.5 million, or $500,000 per teacher, could only get rid of 4 of them. This is why so many principals don't even try to get rid of bad teachers. Teachers' unions are for seniority. Seniority, very simply, is a last in, first out system. This means that you're a teacher of the year, I'm a mediocre teacher. Times are tough. One of us has to be laid off. I signed on the dotted line one day before you. One of us has to go. You, teacher of the year, is gone. I, mediocre teacher, get to keep my job. This is an awful thing to do to our children. There is a case coming in January of 2014 called Students Matter. That's a very interesting lawsuit, and if this thing flies, tenure as we know it, seniority, and the dismissal statutes would be removed from the state education code and made unconstitutional, and each individual school district would have to come up with their own versions. And this is the way it should be. The teachers union, California Teachers Association, was not a part of this suit. This is essentially a suit against the state of California, but the teachers union realized that they're going to be affected by this, so they signed on as an interested party because they know if this thing flies, they'll be putting out fires all over the state, and they don't have that kind of money and manpower. This is a very, very big deal coming this January. What are teachers unions against? Teachers unions are against charter schools. Charter schools, very simply, are publicly funded schools that don't have to live by all the rules and the regulations that are in the state ed code and the typical union contract. Charter schools tend to do a better job than traditional public schools, and they do it for much less money. They do it for about 80 cents on the dollar. The good thing about a charter school is they get closed if they don't do the job. What happens is someone wants to start a charter school, make a proposal, a charter authorizing organization, maybe the county, maybe the state, says, okay, this sounds good, you have 5 years to accomplish your goals. At the end of 5 years, they do a good job, they get another 5-year charter. They don't do their job, they're gone, and in that sense, charter schools are run like a business. Failing businesses don't keep going and going and going. They shut down. The good news is that only 12% of charters are unionized across the country, and in California, about 15% are unionized. But a lot of times those contracts are what are called thin contracts, giving the principal much more leeway as to where they can place teachers and how much they can pay teachers, and then get rid of bad teachers. Teachers' unions love to trot out the Credo study from about 4 years ago. The Credo study basically said that charter schools don't do a better job than public schools. They do about the same job. And the unions love this. Now, the study was faulty, the methodology was not good, and I won't get into the weeds on this here. But let's just say that the Credo study was right and they do the same job. They're still doing the same job for 80 cents on the dollar, and for that reason alone, they should proliferate. Teachers' unions don't like homeschooling. Oh, see, anything that gets in their way is problematic. And of course, if a kid's at home, kid doesn't need a certified teacher in the classroom. Although they did try, and they got a judge to make a ruling several years ago that a parent who homeschools their child has to have a teaching credential. I mean, this pretty much blew me out of my chair when I read this, but fortunately, several months later, a higher court overturned it, and things are okay now. But you know the unions are in there trying. And just think, if the state can tell you that you need a credential to teach your child at home, then they can say, oh, you're going to cook for your child, you need a chef's license. Your kid is sick? Well, you can't take care of your own kid. You're not a doctor. You're not a registered nurse. You can't take care of your own kid. This is government overreach at its most drastic and scary. Online learning. Teachers' unions don't like online learning. Typically, online learning means fewer teachers. Nevertheless, the California Federation of Teachers, CTA's junior partner here in California, has managed to get virtual charters capped at 25-1. As everybody knows, a teacher who teaches online classes can handle a lot more than 25 kids. It's ridiculous. The next one is really, I mean, dare I say, laughable. I mean, to laugh at a cry. To put your kid into a virtual charter, the charter authorizer must be in a contiguous county to where you live. So if you live in Los Angeles County, you can only take classes at a virtual charter that is housed in Los Angeles, Kern, Ventura, Orange, or San Bernardino. 2 counties away? No. This is nuts. It's like telling me, I live in Los Angeles, you can't use Google as your search engine because Google's in Mountain View in Silicon Valley, and it's not in a contiguous county. This is the internet. This is nuts. The best online learning model that I know of is the blended learning model. And this is not where a kid stays at home. It's more traditional. A kid goes to school and has a flesh and blood teacher, but his first teacher is a computer. And the beauty of that is this. Traditionally, the best teachers in the world could only teach the students in their room. Or maybe they'd make a tape and send it around, but they could reach very few people. Now with the internet, they can reach the world. So every kid now is going to have access to a fabulous teacher via the internet. And the flesh and blood teacher comes in here after the kid's on the internet with the master teacher. The flesh and blood teacher can answer questions, do some backup, they can do some remediation if needed, they can answer questions, they can do reinforcement, they can do enrichment. And the beauty of the system is that the teacher can have 20 kids in a small group doing that, while the other 20 are learning on the computer. So a teacher can easily handle 40 kids in that circumstance. So the union hates it because if every school used that model, every school in the state, we need half as many teachers. and this would kill the union's gravy train. Parent trigger, very interesting piece of legislation. Very simply, if a school has been failing for 4 years, parents, 50% plus one of them sign a petition, they can change the governance of that school. And there are different models. They can choose to shut the school down, they can get rid of the principal, they can get rid of certain teachers, they can turn it into a charter school. The beauty of it is you don't need to talk to the school board about it. You don't need to talk to the union about it. You just go and do it. Leaving the unions out is a big problem for them. And in the few places where it's been tried, this is a new law, the unions have gone in and threatened parents in all kinds of ways. Threatening them by telling them, for example, that you sure you're here legally? Because if you're not, if you sign on the dotted line on that petition, you might be asked to leave the country. And there's no truth to this, but that's what the unions do. The biggest bugaboo for the teachers' unions are what are called vouchers. Vouchers, very simply, is where the government still pays for education, but you can choose to take that government subsidy, the education subsidy, and go to a private school. Now, vouchers are in, I believe, 18 states, and I think there are 33 different programs, and they're niche programs, like they're in Ohio, they're in Cleveland, and in other states, they're statewide, but they only deal with special needs kids or kids who live below the poverty line. But we have nothing like that in California. The irony behind all this is that the best voucher system I know of is in Sweden, which is essentially a socialist country. And what they do in Sweden, a parent starts their kid off in a public school, and if they are happy, fine. But if they're not happy, they can take that kid out, put their kid in any other public school with his room, or any private school with his room, and it's a big and, the money follows the child. And it's working out so well. The privatization factor is so good that even the socialists like it in Sweden. Yet we in America cannot seem to get our arms around this. Private schools tend to do education better, and they do it cheaper. Obviously, there are exceptions, like where Mr. Obama sends his kid to Sidwell Friends. The upper crust, the Tony schools, are more expensive. Most private schools do it cheaper and better. And there's no mystery behind this, because if they're not doing, a private school's not doing a good job, they get shut down, just like a business. Competition works. The unions love to say that you're siphoning money away from public schools. Vouchers are taking money out of the public schools as if this is like criminal. I say, yes, vouchers are taking money from public school, but vouchers are also taking kids. So if a school loses half its kids, half its money, the same amount, the kids who are there are not suffering. They have the same amount for them. What the unions will never tell you is that there have been 23 studies done about vouchers and their effects on public schools. 23 studies. One study showed that vouchers had no effect on public schools. 22 studies show that where vouchers have been instituted, public schools actually improve. Not one study has ever shown that vouchers have hurt public education. The unions will never tell you that. Why? Because competition works. It works in the business world, and it works in education. What we have in our country is a monopoly. And not only is it a public education monopoly, it's a monopoly by zip code. Steve Jobs used to talk about when he was a kid, he used to see a bumper sticker which said, "We don't care, we don't have to, we're the phone company." And those of you a certain age remember, we had one phone company. They weren't very good, the service was not good, and they were expensive. All of a sudden there was deregulation, prices came down, service got better. Monopolies do not work. If I said to you, you told me you were going out to dinner tonight, I said, oh, you're going to go to that restaurant down the street? And he said, no, that restaurant's not very good. The food's not good, and the service isn't very good. I'm going to go to a restaurant a couple of miles away. And I say, no, got to go to that restaurant down the street. And you tell me I'm crazy. And it's a crazy statement. But yet this is what we do to our children. Maybe there's a doctor who lives near you. He's not very good. Maybe he's killed a few of his patients. You tell me you're going to see your doctor. I said, oh, is it the doctor down the street? He said, no, I have a much better doctor 3 miles away. I say, no, you have to go to the doctor down the street. You look at me like I'm crazy, and it is a crazy statement. Yet this is what we do to our children, and it's criminal. I'd just like to say a few words about Common Core. There's a lot that can be said about Common Core, but I just want to say a few words. And I just want to start off by reading a very brief statement, which pretty much sums up my feelings on the matter. Common Core is written by special interest and federally funded nonprofits in secret. It was pushed on states by the federal government before they even saw the final product. Its requirements are vague, meaningless, and shockingly low quality. It is an entirely unproven set of mandates, untried anywhere in the world. States are incorporating creepy data mining on teachers and kids, and the history of American education has shown, as the Soviets did on a larger scale, that central planning breeds corruption and destitution. That's pretty much it. Yet I think it's important to point out that Common Core, it's sort of a new wrinkle, but it's really yet another federal intrusion into education, which started in 1965 under President Lyndon Johnson. Back then it was called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. That morphed into No Child Left Behind under George W. Bush. This has turned into Race to the Top under President Obama. Common Core is essentially, it was originally, I should say, pushed on the country by the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. This is before the feds really got their claws into it. And it has not been means tested. It's one size fits all. California's going to be hurt because California's traditionally taught algebra in 8th grade. Now with the Common Core standards, they'll be teaching it in 9th grade. James Milgram, who's a Stanford mathematician who was working on the standards, refused to sign off on them because he said that California students now will be 2 years behind their peers by the end of high school. I should say international peers by the end of high school. Common Core will be a fiscal disaster. Right now, one of the reasons many states are signing on because they're getting money from the federal government. But what they're not realizing is what's coming after the initial monies come in. Books are going to have to be rewritten. Tests will have to be redone. Teachers are going to have to go through tons of professional development. They're going to have to be taught the new standards and how to teach them. This is going to be a huge cost. And then many districts, LA Unified, for example, are hiring coaches to coach the teachers to teach the children. It is an enormous mess. Protagonists love to say, they point out that there are certain countries that do better in international comparisons than we do, that have national standards, and they're right. But what they don't tell you is that there are other countries that do worse than us who have national standards. So the national standards are a red herring in that argument. Everybody likes to talk about Finland, and Finland does have a great education system. And they did have Common Core standards, national standards. But it's important to note that Finland is a country of 5.4 million people. 5.4 million people in the entire country. Here in Los Angeles County, we have 10 million people. You cannot compare national standards in Finland to national standards in the United States. By the way, there are many Tea Party groups around the country who are very actively involved in fighting Common Core. If you're interested, I think you should look them up. As far as everything else, what can we do? Now, throughout my talk, you get the idea that things are not very good. But things are not lost. We can still take action. We must take action because we're losing the battle. One thing you can do is run for school board. It may not be easy. You might need to invest a little money or find some people to invest some money in you. But it's a very important position. And it might be a little bit tough because if the entrenched special interests, the school boards that like doing things the same way, whether they work or not, and the unions, same thing, they'll fight you. But it's a very important position. And I do know, even here in Southern California, I do know very conservative people on school boards. And they're lonely. And they would like some company. Evangelize about what I've said here, talked about today. Talk to your friends about what I've talked about. Look for legislators who are doing the right thing and trying to pass good reform legislation. Look for initiatives that do the same thing and maybe try to limit union power. California Teachers Empowerment Network at c10home.org has an Act Now page in which we give suggestions about what people can do. Very importantly, visit your schools. More importantly, volunteer at your local school. The taxpayers need to get involved in the local schools. How better than by volunteering? You'll be doing two things. You'll be maybe helping a kid catch up on his reading. Maybe a little boy or little girl's fallen behind, and you can work with them one-on-one. And you'll also be a watchdog. And if you see something wrong, talk to the principal about it. If you see waste, talk to the principal about it. If you don't get any action, talk to your friends, bring them in and talk to the principal. If they still don't get action, go to the school board. Meet with your school board members one-on-one if you have to. Go to the press if you have to. If you're a taxpayer, if you're a citizen, you have a right to be in that school, and you have a right to scream if you see something you don't think is right. And in closing, let me just say, I know there's somebody out there who's thinking, why should I be interested in public education? I don't pay that much in taxes. My kids are out of school. My kids are in private school. Why should I care? To that person I say, you may have had the biggest, swankiest stateroom on the Titanic. But with the Titanic hit the iceberg, the condition of your particular stateroom didn't matter because you, like everyone else, went down with the ship. And unless we start doing something about public education, our country, like the Titanic, will sink. I thank you very much.